grave and labor-intensive. The overall mood must be serious, emphasizing the intensity of the physical and mental labor carried out in the quiet hours of the night. Meditative, focus-driven. The repetitive action of sorting mail and the rhythmic movement of the train should be treated as a form of deep concentration or meditation. This creates a powerful contrast between the external motion and the internal stillness of focus. Grounded romanticism. Acknowledge the historical significance of the RPO and the profound human connection of written mail, but do not gloss over the harsh, subtly dangerous and demanding realities of the job. Dr. Aris Thorne lived his life by the clock, a paradox for a man whose work constantly questioned the linearity of time. His lab was a subterranean sanctuary beneath the sprawling chaos of New Delhi, a place where the air was sterile, the light was low, and the digital hum of his chronometers was the only gospel. Aris was a theoretical chronophysicist, which, in layman's terms, meant he spent his days tracking things that shouldn't exist: temporal anomalies, quantum echoes, and the ghost trails of realities that had been, or perhaps should have been. He was currently fixated on a data set he called the Deca-Signature. It was a faint but undeniable resonance in the fabric of spacetime, a repeating waveform that suggested the existence of 9 major, stable timelines, all branching from a single primordial root. His timeline, the one where he drank burnt coffee and battled the university's bureaucracy, was designated Timeline Prime, or T1. "Just 9, Kai," he muttered to his assistant, a young woman named Kai Sharma, whose practical genius complemented his abstract obsession. Kai, her dark hair pulled back in a severe braid, adjusted the environmental controls. "The maths are clean, Aris. Levels I through I9. It's the most elegant model of the multiverse ever conceived. Why does it bother you?" Aris walked to the central holotank, its blue light illuminating the weary lines around his eyes. The tank displayed a rotating kaleidoscopic map of the timelines, a dense, beautiful braid of reality. "Because," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "the universe is never that neat. And because for the past 4 cycles, my sensors have detected a blip, a tremor, a 10th signature, T10. Kai frowned, pulling up the raw data on her personal pad. The Deca-Signature was a foundational theory taught in every advanced physics course. It represented stability, the cosmological constraints that prevented the multiverse from collapsing into infinite, meaningless noise. A 10th was an aberration. "The data's too sparse, Doctor. It could be an error, cosmic background noise, or maybe just a fleeting, unstable microbranch that's already collapsed." "It's not," Aris insisted, tapping the tank where the ghost of a 10th thread flickered at the edge of the tapestry. "It's stable, faint but constant, and it doesn't fit the model. All 9 timelines, no matter how different they are, the ones where the Roman Empire never fell, the ones where technology regressed after the Great War, the ones where humanity never left Earth, they all adhere to the same foundational quantum physics. T10, it has a different gravimetric constant. It's physically impossible." For Aris, this was more than a professional mystery. It was a personal threat. He dedicated his life to understanding the rules of existence. The 10th timeline was screaming that his rules were wrong.
The subsequent week was a blur of frantic calculation and ignored sleep. Aris and Kai built a new device, the Chronos-Aperture, a focused emitter designed not to travel through time or realities, but to listen to them. They tuned it precisely to the frequency of the T10 resonance. On the 3rd day, the aperture gave them a voice. It wasn't a broadcast or a message. It was a fragment of ambient noise, a sound that cut through the silence of the lab like a shard of glass. It was the sound of a bell, a clear, melancholic chime, followed by the distinct, wet sound of a heavy body hitting water. Then silence. "A single event," Kai breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. A drowning, perhaps? A suicide? No, Aris said, leaning close to the speaker. He isolated the sound of the bell, running it through a spectral analysis. Listen to the acoustics. It's an enormous space, cathedral, perhaps. And the chime, it's a specific pattern. 3 strikes, a pause, then one final deep toll. He spent the next 24 hours scouring global acoustic databases for the signature. When he finally found a match, the results were deeply unsettling. The chime belonged to the great bell of St. Jude's Cathedral in Old London, a bell that in T1 had been melted down for scrap metal in 1941 during a wartime salvage drive. The timeline where the bell wasn't destroyed, Kai realized. T10 is a history where the Second World War played out differently in London. No, Kai, Aris said. He leaned close to the holotank. He pointed back to the flickering, faint line of T10. If that bell exists, T10 is a timeline that does not adhere to the fundamental nexus constants of our multiverse. It's not just another branch, it's an entirely different tree. This meant T10 wasn't just another reality. It was an anomaly that defied the very laws of their existence. It was a universe where 2 + 2 might equal 5. The problem quickly escalated from philosophical to existential. Within days, the aperture began to pick up more noise from T10. The sounds were more complex now, a child singing a nursery rhyme in a language Aris couldn't identify, the roar of a massive engine that sounded biological, not mechanical, and a repetitive rhythmic sound like a giant hammer hitting stone. The faint resonance of T10 also began to affect T1. Micro-anomalies started appearing, a newspaper headline from last week reappearing with a different font, a colleague who'd always worn glasses suddenly not needing them, Aris himself discovering a scar on his forearm he was certain had never been there before. The boundary between the realities was fraying. The impossible timeline was beginning to bleed into the possible.
Grave and labor-intensive. The overall mood must be serious, emphasizing the intensity of the physical and mental labor carried out in the quiet hours of the night. Meditative, focus-driven. The repetitive action of sorting mail and the rhythmic movement of the train should be treated as a form of deep concentration or meditation. This creates a powerful contrast between the external motion and the internal stillness of focus. Grounded romanticism. Acknowledge the historical significance of the RPO and the profound human connection of written mail, but do not gloss over the harsh, sooty, dangerous, and demanding realities of the job. Aris knew what he had to do. If T10 was truly an anomaly that violated the laws of the stable multiverse, its continued existence posed a catastrophic threat, a chain reaction that could lead to a timeline collapse where all 9 realities would fold into a singularity of non-existence. He had to go there. He had to find out why the gravimetric constant was different and how a nexus constant had been broken. He had to find the source of the anomaly and, if necessary, prune the 10th timeline from existence. Kai stared at the schematics of the newly modified Chronos-Aperture, now a cramped, coffin-like transport chamber. It's too risky, Doctor. We don't know what kind of physics we'll be dealing with. We don't even know what you'll look like there. You could be a completely different person. Aris smiled, a tired, determined glint in his eyes. That's the beauty of it, Kai. My quantum signature is tied to T1. When I arrive in T10, my local counterpart, the T10 Aris Thorne, will simply cease to be. My consciousness, my memories, and my mission will overwrite his. I will become him. And I will find out why that damned bell is still ringing. He climbed into the chamber, the air hissing as the seals engaged. The last thing he saw before the chamber door locked was Kai's terrified face. Good luck, Doctor. And remember, if the physics are different, even gravity might not be your friend. Aris nodded, strapping himself in. The chamber filled with a blinding white light, and the last coherent thought he had was a cold, terrifying calculation. He was about to step into a reality that by every law of science he knew should have been impossible. The transition was not the seamless quantum jump Aris had theoretically mapped out. It was a brutal, overwhelming collision. The blinding white light of the Chronos-Aperture did not dissipate. It became the sound of a billion shrieking data points, the feel of his cellular structure being pulled apart and reassembled by invisible, agonizing forces. His memory of T1, of Kai's anxious face, the sterile hum of his lab, the weight of a normal Earth's gravity became instantly, violently overlaid with foreign sensations. He felt a profound sense of wrongness, like wearing clothes that were tailored for a similar but fundamentally different body. The pain vanished as abruptly as it began, replaced by a suffocating stillness and the thick, metallic tang of uncirculated air. Aris's eyes snapped open. He was no longer in the chrome coffin-like aperture. He was in a bed. The room was vast and dark, lit only by a faint, sickly green luminescence filtering through heavy, leaded glass windows. He lay on a mattress that felt less like foam and more like stiff woven reeds. His head swam. He pushed himself up, but his internal gyroscope rebelled. He pitched forward, catching himself on a bedside table made of a dense, dark wood. The gravimetric constant. He ran a quick mental check. His body felt lighter, perhaps by 5 to 7%, enough to throw off balance, but not enough to be immediately catastrophic. Every movement required a subtle, conscious recalibration. The difference wasn't just in the strength of gravity, but in its quality. It felt heavy, yet simultaneously unstable, as if the ground itself was humming with a hidden frequency. Aris swung his legs over the side of the bed. He was dressed in thick, gray wool clothing, the fabric rough against his skin. This was the attire of his T10 counterpart. He instinctively reached for his wrist, where his T1 comm unit should have been. It was gone, replaced by a smooth, cold silver band. A wave of someone else's memories hit him, a sudden, intrusive surge. Not the deep, defining memories, but the shallow, day-to-day ones. The specific taste of T10's weak, sugary coffee, the name of the woman who brought him his daily meal, the dread associated with a certain heavy wooden door in the next room. I am Aris Thorne. I am from Timeline Prime. I am here to find the Nexus break. He repeated the mantra, fighting the psychic bleed. He located a small, steel-cased mirror on the wall. The face that stared back at him was his, yet subtly altered. The lines were deeper, etched with a kind of resigned weariness that his T1 self had not possessed. His hair was cropped close, military style. Most unsettlingly, his T10 eyes held a faint, constant red glow in the iris, barely visible in the dim light. What kind of physics creates bioluminescent eyes? He thought, his scientist's curiosity momentarily overriding his fear. He explored the room. It was Spartan, clearly a professional dwelling, not a home. The desk was dominated by a large, bulky chronometer, an analog device with interlocking brass gears and a display that showed time in a non-decimal format. 10 hours to a day, 100 minutes to an hour. Next to it was a small, tattered, leather-bound journal. He opened it, recognizing the handwriting as his own, yet the words were not. Entry 402. The hammer does not cease. The resonance is stronger this cycle. The director insists it is all natural consequence of the shift. Lies. The shift began when the constants broke. St. Jude's bell rings. The impossible is now architecture. If I cannot find the flaw in the gravimetric anchor, we will all be consumed by the void. The journal confirmed his suspicions. T10 Aris Thorne was a physicist fighting the same battle, but from the inside. A sudden sharp metallic sound from the next room, the one associated with dread, jolted him. The heavy wooden door slid open with a sound like grinding stone. A woman stood in the doorway. She was tall, impeccably dressed in a pristine white uniform with metallic trim, and she carried herself with an air of lethal efficiency. Her eyes, too, held the faint red glow. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice cool and devoid of emotion. "You are awake. The director requires your immediate presence. The latest data on the decay vectors is troubling." Aris recognized her from the memory fragments. She was Director Eva Rostova, his superior. Or rather, T10 Aris' superior. "Of course, Director Rostova," Aris replied, consciously mimicking the reserved, wearied tone the memory bleed provided. "Just gathering my notes. The gravimetric anchor is proving resistant to localized counter-frequency modulation." He threw in a string of T10 jargon he'd pulled from the journal entries. Rostova's gaze was sharp, lingering on his face for a second too long. "I trust the last resonance cycle did not disturb you too deeply, Doctor. You were offline for almost 48 hours. "A necessary depth of integration," Aris lied smoothly, adopting a professional detachment. "My arrival was mistaken for a deep research trance." "Ensure it doesn't happen again," Rostova said, stepping back. "The hammer waits for no one." He followed Rostova out of the room and into the labyrinthine facility. They walked through endless corridors of gray, reinforced concrete. The entire structure felt like a fortified bunker, cold, utilitarian, and oppressive. Through a small window, Aris caught his first glimpse of T10 London. It was a bleak, monochromatic cityscape. Grave and labor-intensive. The overall mood must be serious, emphasizing the intensity of the physical and mental labor carried out in the quiet hours of the night. Meditative or focus-driven. The repetitive action of sorting mail and the rhythmic movement of the train should be treated as a form of deep concentration or meditation. This creates a powerful contrast between the external motion and the internal stillness of focus. Grounded romanticism. Acknowledge the historical significance of the RPO and the profound human connection of written mail, but do not gloss over the harsh, sooty, dangerous, and demanding realities of the job. Dominated by brutalist architecture and crisscrossed by elevated rail lines, the sky was not the familiar blue, nor the smoggy gray of T1's pollution, but a dull, metallic ochre. And everywhere, etched into the sides of the colossal, windowless buildings, was a recurring symbol, an angular, 10-pointed star, the symbol of the 10th timeline. Most notably, the air throbbed with a slow, powerful, rhythmic sound, the hammer. Thump, pause, thump, pause. It was the rhythmic sound he'd heard through the Chronos-Aperture, amplified 1,000-fold. It vibrated in his chest cavity and rattled the teeth in his skull. "What is that sound?" Aris risked asking, trying to make it sound like an idle question. Rostova didn't break her stride. "That, Doctor, is the pylon, the director's primary stabilizing mechanism, the constant adjustment required to hold our altered reality in place. It prevents the void from consuming us." "A constant adjustment to hold an impossible timeline stable," Aris mused. "The hammer is the sound of T10 fighting to exist against the laws of the multiverse." Finally, they reached an immense observation deck overlooking a colossal subterranean cavern. In the center of the cavern, bathed in the sickly green light, was an unbelievable sight. It was St. Jude's Cathedral, perfectly preserved, impossibly intact. But it wasn't standing on a street in London. It was suspended, seemingly in mid-air,
held aloft by thick, glowing cables connected to the ceiling of the cavern. And from its central spire, the massive dark form of the great bell stood silent. "The nexus constant," Aris whispered, a chill crawling up his spine. Rostova nodded, misunderstanding his awe for professional confirmation. "Precisely. We use it as the focal point, an object of immense cultural and temporal mass. Our calculations showed that to maintain stability in the shift, we required a temporal anchor, something that should have been utterly destroyed, but wasn't." "So why did it ring earlier?" Aris asked, remembering the acoustic signature. "That was the resonance cycle," Rostova explained, pointing to a series of glowing blue plates built into the floor around the suspended cathedral. "Every 10 hours, the plates emit a counter-frequency wave to keep the cathedral's timeline signature locked. The resulting vibration causes the bell to toll. It is the sound of our survival." Aris looked past the cathedral. Just beyond it, the wall of the cavern dissolved into a churning, swirling gray-black mist that defied physics, the void that T10 Aris had written about. It was reality itself fraying at the edges. This was not a simple alternate history. T10 was a salvaged, engineered reality, maintained only by a powerful, ceaseless effort around a paradox, the preserved St. Jude's bell. Rostova led him toward a raised platform where an imposing figure sat at a grand, antique desk, gazing over the void. This was the director.
"Director," Rostova announced, "Dr. Thorne is here with the revised decay vector projections." The director was an elderly man, his face a mask of severe intellect. He didn't look up, instead tracing a line on a complex map before him. "Dr. Thorne, the decay is accelerating. T1 through T9 are fighting back. They are trying to prune us. You need to find the flaw in the gravimetric anchor now. Our entire reality depends on it." Aris stood before the most powerful man in the 10th timeline, a man who had engineered the impossible and was now fighting a temporal war against the rest of the multiverse. He had reached the heart of the anomaly. He had to play the part of the devoted T10 scientist, even as his T1 mind raced with a terrible realization. The flaw in the gravimetric anchor isn't a technical error. The flaw is me. My arrival has destabilized their forced reality. The question was no longer how T10 existed, but whether Aris could save his own timeline without condemning this one.
Grave and labor-intensive. The overall mood must be serious, emphasizing the intensity of the physical and mental labor carried out in the quiet hours of the night. Meditative, focus-driven. The repetitive action of sorting mail and the rhythmic movement of the train should be treated as a form of deep concentration or meditation. This creates a powerful contrast between the external motion and the internal stillness of focus. Grounded romanticism. Acknowledge the historical significance of the RPO and the profound human connection of written mail, but do not gloss over the harsh, sooty, dangerous, and demanding realities of the job. Aris adopted the demeanor of the loyal, beleaguered scientist stepping up to the director's desk. He placed a hand on the holographic map, which showed complex, shifting stress lines radiating from the suspended cathedral, the decay vectors. "Director," Aris began, mimicking the measured, slightly defeated cadence of his T10 self. "The gravimetric anchor is not flawed in its construction, it's flawed in its premise. We are using a T1 constant based on a 9.8 meters per second squared foundational structure to stabilize a reality that is functionally 9.1 meters per second squared." The director finally looked up, his severe features momentarily softening with interest.
The difference in the G constant is necessary to accommodate the shift mass, the sheer quantity of alternative information we've salvaged from the temporal currents. We knew the physics wouldn't perfectly align. But the misalignment is creating a temporal backlash, Aris countered, inventing terminology on the fly, but basing the core idea on his T1 knowledge. The moment our anchor locks the T1 physics onto the cathedral, the surrounding T10 reality snaps back, causing the decay vectors to spike. It's a continuous self-inflicted wound. He traced a line on the holographic projection, showing an area where the stress lines were particularly intense, near a series of humming power conduits. We need to stabilize the local gravity around the anchor to create a neutral zone, allowing the T1 and T10 constants to meet in the middle, eliminating the backlash.
Rostova, standing a respectful distance away, raised an eyebrow.
That would require localized gravitational emitters, Doctor. We have no such technology.
We don't need new technology, Director. We need to repurpose the old. The original construction plans for the pylon, the hammer, include inertial dampeners. They were meant to counteract seismic activity, but they're built on the same principles. If I can reroute the dampeners and tune them to a specific 9.4 meters per second squared frequency, a quantum average, we can create the neutral zone. The Director pondered this, his eyes fixed on the map. It was a massive recalibration and incredibly dangerous. A miscalculation of even 0.01 meters per second squared could collapse the cavern.
The alternative is to let the surrounding reality consume us, Director, Aris said, making his voice sound grimly resolute. I need 24 hours, unsupervised, in the pylon's lower engineering complex. I need to handle the rerouting personally. No one else has my level of expertise with the chronometron's complex harmonic controls. After a tense silence that stretched with the rhythmic thump of the pylon, the Director nodded once. Do it, Dr. Thorne, and do not fail. Rostova, give him access to the lower levels. Any distraction, any sabotage, and you will both answer to me. The secret of the red glow. Descending into the lower levels of the pylon complex was like entering the body of a dying god. The air grew thick with ozone and heat. The rhythmic hammer was deafening here, shaking Aris's bones with every beat. He could see the colossal mechanical arm that housed the chronometron, driving the frequency that held T10 in place. Aris activated a hidden maintenance tunnel he'd identified from the T10 memories, locking the door behind her. He wasn't looking for inertial dampeners. He was looking for the debris of his arrival. It took him 3 hours, navigating a maze of humming conduits and vast cooling tanks, before he found a faint burn scar on a reinforced metal wall. Scattered nearby were tiny charred fragments of what he recognized as the internal casing of the Chronos-Aperture. He gathered a few of the fragments, placing them carefully in a pocket. The primary aperture was destroyed, but the memory fragments had given him a new, horrifying realization about T10 physics, a realization tied to the red glow in his eyes.
He needed a way to signal Chi in T1. Without the aperture, he had to use T10's own physics against itself. He moved to a maintenance panel controlling the immense power conduits feeding the pylon. He didn't dare touch the main flow, but he located a secondary line feeding the facility's internal lighting system, specifically the system that caused the low ambient green luminescence. Aris pulled out the small silver band from the T10 counterpart's wrist. It wasn't a watch. It was a basic bioregulator, a passive device that collected residual quantum energy from the wearer. And he knew exactly where that energy ended up, in the eyes. The red glow in the T10 population's eyes was not an evolutionary trait. It was a result of their altered gravimetric constant. T10 physics required constant, minute energy expenditure to keep the local mass stable. The bioregulator was harvesting residual quantum energy from their brains, storing it and then redirecting a small constant flow through the optical nerves, a biological stabilization loop. It was what allowed them to exist with the wrong gravity. Aris suddenly understood the full weight of the director's actions. The director wasn't just maintaining T10, he was subtly enslaving his population, using their own neural energy as part of his stabilizing mechanism. Aris worked quickly, connecting the broken fragments of the T1 aperture casing to the lighting circuit. He didn't have enough material to build a communications device, but he could create a concentrated burst of T1 quantum noise, a signal that would be utterly foreign to T10 sensors, but unmistakable to his lab equipment in T1.
He dove deeper into the files, ignoring the faint metallic scent of ozone and fear in the air. Log 221C, date 2026.01.20, subject, wide area deployment test, objective, assess population effects in unsuspecting population clusters, R1, T4. Method, sub-audible broadcast of A7 carrier wave combined with subliminal psychoacoustic data packets. Observation, significant rise in generalized anxiety, social polarization, and long-term memory distortion recorded. The mystery, Rahosa, was solved, and the truth was worse than any UFO conspiracy. Project Siren wasn't a defense against foreign aggression. It was a tool for domestic psychological control. The obsidian hum was a silent, invisible pulse designed to keep the American populace in a state of controlled anxiety and compliant confusion. The vast, empty desert of Nevada was their sound laboratory, the ultimate Gopan Stan, secret location. A heavy thud from the tunnel entrance below tore Aris from the console. They had found the secret door. They were inside. He quickly downloaded the remaining log files onto his SSD. The tactical team's boots echoed in the throat of the tunnel. Not the chaotic sound of a confused search party, but the measured, deliberate steps of trained hunters. He was trapped in the center of their masterpiece. He looked up at the massive toroidal generator, its silent presence menacing. He knew how this machine worked. He knew how sound waves could be used not just to control, but to destroy. If he couldn't escape, he could at least make a statement. He could turn their weapon against the very facility that housed it, creating a blast of acoustic anarchy that would shake the foundations of their secret world. But first, he had to survive the men now emerging from the darkness. The leader of the unit stepped into the faint, eerie glow of the console monitor, and Aris felt his blood run cold. He didn't need the man's name. He recognized the face that had ruined his life 5 years ago. Part 4. The Final Transmission. The tactical team fanned out below, their movements precise and silent. But Aris only had eyes for their leader. The man stood with the authority of someone who owned the air he breathed, holding the directional acoustic rifle with casual readiness. "Hello, Aris," the leader's voice crackled through a helmet speaker, resonating unnervingly in the massive dome. "Always chasing the impossible frequencies, aren't you? I should have known you'd follow the hum." Aris gripped the SSD drive, his knuckles white. Dr. Alistair Vance. Aris spat out the name, the years of bitterness coalescing. "You didn't think I'd recognize your signature in a 7.8 Hz waveform, the same resonant frequency you tried to publish on before the funding dried up." "Funding never dried up, Aris. It was merely reallocated. You had the brilliance, but not the discipline. You wanted to heal with sound. We realized sound is far more effective when used to control." Vance was the one who had discredited Aris's research, labeling his findings on infrasound's emotional impact as fringe science, effectively ending his career. Vance had simply taken the blueprint, presented it to the right military contractors, and built the ultimate Gopan Stan, secret location.
Project Siren, Aris said, his voice hard. Psychological warfare against your own people, turning the desert silence into an instrument of anxiety. It's social stabilization, Vance corrected, a chilling absence of emotion in his tone. A low, steady thrum that keeps the machine running smoothly. No more chaotic sentiment. We simply filter the noise of dissent before it becomes sound. He gestured to the toroidal generator. And now you've recorded its most perfect iteration. That data belongs to us. The 3 tactical operatives below raised their sound cannons. Aris was trapped in the console gallery, the only exit being a sheer drop or the way he came in, now blocked. You won't get far, Aris, Vance continued, stepping onto the ramp that led up to the console. You ran your little sonic frequency to open the door, didn't you? Clever. But this place is designed to contain its own sound. You've sealed yourself in a coffin. Aris glanced from the console to the central generator. He had the recording, but if he died here, the truth would be buried with him, the ultimate unsolved Rahosa, mystery. He had to buy time.
Rostova's hand wavered. The director's desperation was a more powerful weapon than Aris's words. Aris pressed his advantage. Rostova, the bell in the cathedral, it wasn't destroyed in your history because the director prevented the salvage drive. He altered a nexus constant to create a focal point. But altering a constant doesn't stabilize a new timeline. It creates a temporal black hole. You aren't being consumed by T1 through T9. You are collapsing into yourselves. The hammer is delaying the inevitable, and I am the only one who can stop it. Rostova made her decision. With a sudden burst of speed fueled by the T10 gravity, she brought the pistol up and slammed the butt of it against Aris's temple. The world dissolved into a ringing, echoing darkness. The last sound Aris heard before consciousness fled was the unstoppable, rhythmic thump of the hammer.